You ever look around the walls of your own home and wonder, what if one day, the very thing you built with your hands, with your years, stopped belonging to you? Sometimes I think life doesn't take from you suddenly. It steals a brick, a smile, a piece of trust at a time, until one day, you realize you're standing inside something that doesn't feel like yours anymore. Before I start, I just want to thank y'all for being here with me tonight. If you're comfortable sharing, tell me in the comments, where are you listening from, and what time is it over there? I'm sitting here in Burlington, Vermont. It's almost 9:30 p.m. The sky outside is navy blue, and I can hear the wind brushing against the old maple trees near my porch. This story isn't easy to tell, but maybe it'll make someone out there think twice before trusting too blindly. Because I did, and it cost me everything I thought I'd built. I was 23 when I first came to Burlington. Back then, I was just a waitress at a small diner near the lake. Life was modest, simple, and real. We didn't have fancy cars or vacations, but we had pride. We believed in earning what we owned. I met my husband, Raymond, there. He was a mechanic, grease-stained hands, steady eyes, and a laugh that came from the belly. He'd come in for coffee every evening after work. We didn't have much when we got married, but we built something together, a dream, brick by brick, that by the time we saved enough to buy our land. I remember standing barefoot on the muddy soil, whispering, "This is where we'll grow old." We designed every corner ourselves. Raymond built the porch with his own hands, the one I still sit on. Watching the world grow older without him. He passed away 12 years ago, and when he did, this house became my anchor, and my silence. My son, David, was always the ambitious one. Smart boy, had a head full of dreams and a heart that never seemed to rest. When he was little, he'd help his dad fix up things around the house. But as he grew older, the world started calling him elsewhere. He left for Boston for college. At first, he'd call every week, then every other week, then, once in a while. You know how it goes. Life starts pulling them away, piece by piece. Still, I was proud. I wanted him to see what the world had for him. I told myself, that's what you build children for, Florence. You build them wings, not cages. After Raymond died, the house started feeling too quiet. You can only talk to walls for so long before your voice starts sounding like an echo dot, so I kept myself busy. I ran a little flower business from the front yard roseleaf garden. I called it. Folks from the neighborhood came to buy lilacs and tulips. Some came just to talk. That garden kept me breathing. Years passed, and David didn't come around much. Sometimes I'd get a call on Mother's Day or Christmas. Always short, polite, rushed. I'd hang up smiling, but my hands would shake after. There's a strange ache in loving someone who doesn't really look back anymore. Then one fall afternoon, the phone rang. It was David. He said, "Mom, I'm thinking of coming back to Burlington for a while. I've been through a rough patch. I could use a little space." My heart nearly leaped out of my chest. I hadn't seen him in over 3 years. When he pulled into the driveway a few weeks later, I almost didn't recognize him. He looked thinner, worn out, like city life had taken its toll. But when I hugged him, I felt that same boy who once built birdhouses with his father in the backyard. He told me he'd lost his job, and his marriage was falling apart. I didn't ask too many questions. Sometimes mothers just listen. I said, "This is your home, David. You can stay as long as you need." He smiled faintly and said, "Thanks, Mom. You've always been my rock." That night, I cooked his favorite chicken pot pie, just like when he was a boy. For the first time in years, the dining table didn't feel empty. We talked, we laughed, we even cried a little. I went to bed that night thinking maybe, just maybe, I had my son back. Days turned into weeks. David started helping out with small errands, fixing light bulbs, mowing the lawn, even checking my mail. He said he wanted to get my paperwork organized, said he'd help with taxes, insurance, and the business license for the flower shop. I thought it was sweet. Finally, my son was caring for me the way I'd always dreamed. He started bringing papers for me to sign, just to keep things tidy, he'd say, and I signed them, because that's what trust looks like, doesn't it? You trust your child with your name, your keys, your house, even your silence. One morning, I noticed something strange. A letter came addressed to Mr. David Carter, property owner. I thought maybe it was just a mix-up, but that night, I asked him. He looked away for a second too long. Then he said, "Oh, Mom, it's just a clerical thing. I'm handling some renovations and needed to update records for the city permit." I nodded. I wanted to believe him, because believing hurts less than doubting the people you love. Still, something felt off. He started spending more time in my office, on calls I wasn't allowed to overhear. When I'd ask, he'd change the subject. Sometimes at night, I'd hear him pacing in the hallway, whispering on the phone. I told myself I was imagining it, because mothers often choose denial over heartbreak. One evening, I found a note on the kitchen counter. It read, "Gone to Boston for a couple of days. Don't worry, I'll handle everything." He didn't say what everything was. When he came back, he was distant, cold. Something in his eyes had changed. That sparkle of guilt mixed with arrogance. He avoided my gaze, and deep down, I felt the first real crack in the foundation of trust I'd built for 40 years. Weeks later, I went to pay my property taxes. The lady at the clerk's office looked at me oddly. She said, "Ma'am, this property isn't registered under your name anymore." I laughed, thought she was mistaken. Then she showed me the document. There, it was my signature, my handwriting, transferring ownership of my house to David Carter. I felt the floor shift under me. My vision blurred. It was like the world had stopped breathing for a moment. I asked her to print a copy. My hands trembled as I held it. And there, beneath the black ink, was the day I'd unknowingly signed it. The paperwork he'd brought me, my own son. I didn't confront him right away. For 3 days, I walked around the house touching the walls, the furniture, the frames of our old photographs. I ran my hand over the porch railing Raymond had built and thought, how do you lose something twice in one lifetime? When I finally asked David about it, he didn't deny it. He looked at me and said, "Mom, I needed collateral for a loan. It's just temporary. Once I'm back on my feet, I'll return everything." I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. All I could do was whisper, "You used your father's home for a loan." He said nothing. He just turned his face away, and that silence was louder than any argument could have been. That night, I sat by the window, watching the wind move through the trees, and I realized something I never thought I'd have to learn at 68, that sometimes betrayal doesn't come from strangers, it comes from the faces you once kissed goodnight. I didn't know what I was going to do yet, but I knew one thing: the woman who built this house wasn't going to let anyone, not even her own blood, take her dignity away. So, I waited. I smiled at him in the morning like nothing had changed. I made him breakfast, talked about the weather, asked about his plans. Because sometimes, you don't fight right away. You let the storm think you're still sleeping. But inside, I was wide awake. I opened my eyes at 3 in the morning and did not go back to sleep. The house was quiet, but my heart wouldn't be tamed. I sat up, listened to the old clock in the hallway tick the small, slow ticks of midlife, and thought about all the small things that had added up to this. The papers I signed because my son asked. The biscuits I baked because he liked them. The nights I stayed up sewing so he'd have clean clothes for interviews. One signature. One stupid, trusting signature. And somehow, in the dark between heartbeats, that small thing had become a mountain. I told myself I wasn't going to run on anger. Anger burns hot and leaves ash. But calm does not mean wilted. I pulled on a sweater and made myself a cup of coffee, thick as mud, the kind my father taught me to make. The porch light trembled through the kitchen window. I poured my coffee and went straight to the town clerk's office. If you're ever trying to find out whether a paper has blood on it, you don't start by shouting in the kitchen. You go to the place the paper lives, the county records. The women in the clerk's office know everything and say little. I liked that about them. They move quietly, like people who have seen too many lives turn on ink. "Good morning, Florence," said Mrs. Alvarez behind the counter. She had been the clerk longer than I'd been alive. I told her I needed a certified copy of the deed to my property on Maple Drive. Her eyebrows lifted in that way that asked questions without words. She disappeared into the back room and came out with a pale blue folder and a machine that stamped things like time. She placed the printed deed across the counter, and I read my own name until the ink blurred into betrayal. The deed recorded with the county had, in bold, my signature, and beneath it, the grimmer news transferred to my son, David Carter. My knees almost buckled. "This cannot be right," I said aloud. Mrs. Alvarez watched me, silent, then put a hand on mine. "You signed it, Miss Carter," she said gently. "This copy shows your signature and the date. It was recorded 2 weeks ago." Her voice had the softness of someone trying not to press a salt sore. 2 weeks. That was the day he told me the papers were just for organizing things. The lie tasted sour in my mouth. I walked out into the cool air with that paper trembling in my hand. The maple trees hummed. Paper is a small thing until law lives inside it. A deed is more than a piece of paper. It is a key, and someone had used my hands to open my front door for them. Back at the kitchen table, I set the deed down and watched the sunlight move across it. There are moments when you notice everything: the faded tablecloth with my husband's coffee ring, the chipped mug that had always been mine, the mailbox key that hangs on the hook by the door. Mine. Used. I called David. He answered on the fourth ring. His voice had that new, city edge to it, a little clipped. "Hey Mom, what's up? Did you file a deed for the house?" I asked. And I didn't add any small talk because there wasn't any room for it. Double quotes. "Yeah." He sounded casual, like he was telling me about a weather app. "Needed due collateral for a loan. I did it in your name so it would be cleaner." "Don't worry, Mom. I'll sort it." I said I'd only do it temporarily. The word temporarily can be a river that never overflows. It can be a promise that dries up before the soil remembers the wet. "David," I said quietly, "you asked me to sign those papers. You asked me to sign, and I did, because you asked me to trust you. You used my name. Mom, you signed willingly. You knew. Don't make this bigger than it is." His voice had that way of folding itself flat, which I knew meant he wanted me to back off. I hung up, and the birds on the maple tree above the porch started else. When a child refuses to see the pain he causes, he becomes a stranger in his own skin. I could have gone back to the clerk and demanded answers and raged, and there would have been noise, but I wanted something else. I wanted the paper trail. I wanted proof. If a house could be taken on a smile, it can also be rescued on paper. I called my old friend Claire Donovan, a lawyer with a small family firm in town. Claire and I had baked the same kind of bread on good days, and she'd always been honest in the way a good person is honest, blunt but kind. She agreed to meet me that afternoon at noon. I sat on the bench outside her office and listened to college kids pass by, their backpacks slung heavy. In the little time that had passed, I had aged like the porch wood outside my house. The world kept laughing near me, and my chest kept tightening. Claire put two hands around my copies and looked at them, then at me. "Florence," she said softly, "you didn't sign a transfer unless you signed a certain type of deed in front of a notary. Did you see a notary? Did they explain what you were signing?" I nodded once. "He brought papers. He said it was just to update things, to help with insurance, license." I trusted him. That could be a quitclaim deed or a warranty deed. She tapped the printed line where my name was. "If your signature is on record, the next step is to determine whether the notary stamp is legitimate and to run a title search. If someone forged a document, we'll find inconsistencies. If it's a legitimate sign and he had an agreement with you, that's different. Either way, we need to act fast. If there's a sale pending, we can seek an injunction, place a lis pendens on the property." She used the legal phrases the way women use heavy lace, sparingly, with intention. "Come to the office, we'll get a title report, and I'll call a private investigator." You learn to love the legal words when your life begins to lean on their shoulders. Lis pendens, notice of a pending suit. Sounds like a foreign hymn until it saves you a home. We moved at the speed Claire set. The title company was a cold, efficient building on the other side of town. The man behind the desk wore glasses that perched like small moons on his face. He printed a report and slid it across. "There's a mortgage. Miss Carter," he said in that clipped way people in suits can make worse news sound neutral. It was recorded the same day as the deed. The buyer, or the lender, appears to be Green River Holdings. They've put a notice to the county that they intend to foreclose if the loan isn't repaid. My mouth tasted of pennies. Foreclose. I had never felt that word before, like a blade at my back. The private investigator, Claire Hyatt Marcus, was large, soft-spoken, and had eyes that would not be satisfied with anything but the truth. He took my phone number and left with a small folder, then returned the next day with one. He had found emails. He had found wire transfer receipts going into an account that connected to Green River Holdings, and every confirmation pinged when David had been in the house, when he had been on my porch. Marcus also had a notarization record from a notary public that had placed the stamp in front of the deed. And when we called the number on the notary's record, the man who answered was asleep in a motel 60 miles away on the date of the notarization. The notary's office confirmed he had not signed anything that day. Someone had used the stamp without the man's presence. When I held the copies of that call with my hands, I felt a strange, cold relief. There was the proof I needed now. forgery. It wasn't just a poor judgment by a son. It was a crime that we did not threaten. We prepared. Claire filed an emergency motion with the Chittenden County Superior Court that day. The petition asked for a temporary restraining order against any sale or transfer, and for the court to place a lis pendens on my property. We asked for an immediate hearing. The judge who heard us was a woman who spoke earthen truths when she ruled. She looked me in the eye as if seeing the years etched into my face. "Ms. Carter," she said, "we will consider your request. You have presented a prima facie case of fraud. We will issue a temporary restraining order pending further review." I felt faint with gratitude and with the weight of something practical. The law had, in this small moment, wrapped itself around my life like a blanket. The next 2 weeks are a blur of paper and small triumphs and small horrors. Of course, David came to the house. He spoke to me about loans and pressures and needing help. He sounded like a man who had run out of roads, and I felt for him even then. I told him, "You used my name, David. We're going to the court. You'll explain." He was evasive. He blamed a bad investment. He sulked as if the world had wronged him rather than him wronging the world. Neighbors whispered. Some came by with cusp. Some stopped their cars on the street and stared. The smell of gossip is heavier than coffee. But most of all, I noticed how quickly people adjust their faces to someone when the tide turns. The bank that had once been cordial was now functional, strict. The lender's attorney sent a white envelope with tight language. Green River Holdings, the shell company, would have been a faceless entity if it hadn't been for the string. Marcus traced back to a lawyer in a different state who had facilitated suspicious transfers. Every day more of the scaffolding collapsed under the weight of paper and truth. Then came the day of the hearing. Courtrooms have the dull, steady rhythm of life's most important business decisions about children, money, safety. My legs shook as I climbed the courthouse steps. The judge called the case. David sat with his head down. Green River's lawyer read their prepared statement like a prayer. Our team responded with the callous truth of ink and phone records and witnesses. We presented the motel confirmation, the email timestamps, the notarization mismatch. We had the title company's notation that the deed bore the signature that matched my handwriting, but the stamp was not legitimate. The judge listened. She asked David hard, precise questions. He squirmed. He did not answer with the steadiness he used to use to soothe. He answered like someone caught mid-climb on a ladder that had been sawed. "The court will grant a preliminary injunction," she said. "There will be no sale, no foreclosure proceedings, and the lis pendens will stand until this matter is resolved." She fixed him with a look that reached across the courtroom and almost touched his shoulders. "Miss Carter, you have shown cause to proceed." I walked out of that courthouse as if I'd been hollowed and then sewn back. I felt both victorious and battered. I had the house frozen. The siren that would carry it away was silent for now. But a man in the courtroom looked at me as if I had done something unreasonable. My own son. That night, I sat at the kitchen table and thought about what to do next. The law would untangle the crime, but the law could not stitch back the thing inside me that had been laced with trust. My son had used my generosity as a stepping stone. Sometimes justice is achieved by taking things back with dignity. Sometimes it is achieved by setting something on fire and building anew. I had to decide which. For a week I went through the motions of the oldest kind of anger and grief. The kind that sits in your ribcage and breathes, slow and heavy. Then I woke with a thought that felt like a small, hot fist. What do I want? Not what the town expects, not what my son can stomach, not what the law can wrestle out of ink. What do I truly want? The house had been the center of my life, yes, but homes are not merely a roof and paint. They are people. They are tables where stories are told. They are the smell of planting soil on a Thursday afternoon. If this house was to remain under my control, that would be one sort of victory. But what I wanted, odd as it may sound, was to take the hurt and make it useful. I began to meet women at the community center, a woman named June who'd been put out by her child's stepfamily, a veteran named Leela who had nowhere to go after the VA failed to place her, a young mother whose partner had gambled away their apartment deposit. Their eyes landed on me like something hungry and hopeful at once. They saw, in my face, a kind of survivor. They asked me, "Florence, what are you planning once all this is over?" I realized then, even if I won the legal case and regained title, a house with a living room and a porch is heavy with memory. It is heavy with things. Maybe I did not want simply to take that weight back. Maybe what I wanted was to shift the burden into something else. A place where the quiet corners were used to mend people who had been abandoned, where the bedrooms could be filled with laughter again rather than the continuing echo of my son's betrayal. So, I decided to do a strange thing. I asked Claire to keep the title action moving, to win the quiet title case, and void the forged deed. But at the same time, I called the real estate office I had used when Raymond and I bought the property. I told them, cautiously, that if the court restored title to me, I would consider selling, but not back to developers, not to people who would turn Maple Drive into another condo. I'll sell to someone who will let me use some of the proceeds to start a home for women who've been pushed out, forgotten, used, I said. The agent was stunned, then curious. In that way real estate people get when a house has a story. Words move in strange circles. By the time David realized how resolute I had become, deals had begun to take shape. A local buyer wanted the property, but under the condition that I be allowed to keep an easement on the front garden where I could plant perennials and sit. Another investor wanted a profit. I rejected offers that felt small. I wanted the house to mean more than money sewn into pockets. David came to me one afternoon, his eyes hollowed with the knowledge of his own misdeeds. He offered a plan. He would repay the loan, reverse the transfer. He would give me back my name by Christmas. "Mom, let me make this right," he said. But a right made by a man whose conscience only awakens when the law lays a hand on him is not the same as a right chosen at the heart level. I told him, "I need more than words. I need to see you steady for 6 months. I need to see you hold a job, any job, and bring home honest bread. And I need to know you sought help, financial counseling. Yes, you can make things right, but it will take time." He left with a promise, promises that are the same as leaves in March, tender, easy to be fooled by. Meanwhile, our legal team continued. The title exam, the notary affidavit showing the man was not present. The private investigators' email traces. Together they made a net from which the deceit could not easily free itself. The judge's preliminary findings leaned toward reversing any instrument that was the product of forgery. And when the court ordered the deed to be stricken and the title restored to my name, I sat at the kitchen table and wept, the kind of clean weeping that feels like someone closed a door on a bad chapter. Restored. It was a flat, administrative-sounding word, but in it I heard an actual return of the things I had built. I could have planted another flag victory, but I had already decided on a different direction. I called the real estate agent back. "If the title clears and the house is mine again," I told her, "I will sell it at a fair price, with 2 conditions. 1, the buyer allows me to continue gardening in the front and use the porch. 2, I will use a portion of the proceeds to start a haven for women who have been left without a roof. I want a place that offers work, small counseling, a bed, and a kitchen table. I want to give what I have, time, hands, and generosity to those who need it." The agent hesitated and then, as agents do, crunched numbers. A buyer came forward who planned to renovate and use part of the income to fund a community trust that would seed my women's home. It was not perfect money, but it was honest. The buyer agreed to my conditions. I didn't tell David until the sale had been signed and closed. He had been clinging to the idea of redeeming his name solely by reversing the deed. He never expected that I might not want the house back, just the way it had been. I sat him down in the kitchen, the table where we once ate pot pie and planned fishing trips, and told him plainly, "You thought taking this would make you a man," I said. "Buying a home doesn't make a man honest. Standing up to admit your mistakes does. I've decided to sell the house, David. Not because you didn't deserve to have it, you let it go, but because I want to use what I have to give shelter, not bitterness." He stared at me as if I had stolen the floor from under him. "Mom," he said, "small, why would you sell it? Why not keep it and we fix things together?" "Because," I said, "I'm done building my life around the expectation that someone else will fix it. I'm still building. I'm building something that will last longer than family grudges." My voice held steady like a rope that knows its knots. When the closing happened and I signed the transfer to the new owner, I felt something I had not expected. Release. Money is only paper. It can't fix the longings in a human heart. But money can build a roof, and a roof can save a life. I had been taught to measure my worth by the walls that sheltered me. I chose to measure worth differently now, by the number of nights someone would be warm under a blanket, because I chose to sell. That night I packed a small bag. There was grief in letting go, of course. Even as I had made my decisions, I had loved the house with every worn plank of my being. But there is a dignity in choosing who gets the last word. I did not leave with fury or a shaming note. I left with a list of names of women in the community center who needed a place to go, a checkbook with enough to cover the down payment on my new, small apartment, and seeds for the garden I'd intended to start at the women's home. You would think selling a house to get away from a son's betrayal would be a bitter end, but for me it was the beginning. I had turned what was meant to steal my home into something that would buy a dozen roofs for women who had nowhere else to go. And one cold morning, months later, when the women's home opened its door and the first woman stepped across the threshold and hugged me as if I had given her the moon, the ache that had lived in my bones for weeks and months softened. It wasn't an erasure of what David had done. There are wounds that never quite leave, but it was an answer to the question I'd asked on the porch years before. What do I want? I wanted meaning. I wanted a place that would not be a shrine to my hurt, but a workshop for healing. I built it without fanfare. I planted the front garden with lavender and mint. We hung curtains and stockpiled warm blankets. We marked the wall with a chalkboard for the menu and a calendar of small jobs. For the first time in years, the house my hands had built had become part of a larger building, a home for other histories. There's a whole kind of justice that has nothing to do with courts. It is the justice of choosing how to use the pieces left to you. I could have had the house returned and lived quietly bitter. I could have let the years mark me as the stamp of a wrong done. Instead, I used the wrong as the raw material for something better. That is what I want you to know. Sometimes the only way to take back what's been stolen from you is to make something even larger from the loss. It doesn't heal everything. It doesn't make betrayal vanish, but it makes the world a little kinder. It makes you, in the end, someone who did not allow your life to be defined by someone else's greed. And if you ask me whether I regret signing that paper in the first place, I would say no. Not because I wanted to be betrayed, but because that betrayal taught me something I could as easily have missed, that my home was always more than walls, and that my hands are good for building not just for my blood but for anybody who needs a place to rest. Asterisk, you know, I've spent most of my life trying to make peace with things I didn't deserve, but nothing tested me more than the morning I stood outside the house I'd built, my house, and realized it no longer belonged to me. If you've made it this far into my story, thank you. Really. And before I go on, tell me, where are you listening from? And what time is it there? Because here in Boise, Idaho, the morning sun is just starting to slip through the curtains of my small apartment, and I'm sipping my coffee, remembering everything I lost and everything I found after. When I walked away from that house, I didn't look back. My lawyer said I could fight it, that I had enough proof to take my son to court, but I didn't want to destroy what was left of him. You see, the thing about betrayal is it doesn't end with a document or a lie. It keeps echoing inside you, long after the damage is done. That first night in the motel was the hardest. I didn't sleep. I kept thinking about the bricks I'd laid, the garden I'd tended, the creaky front porch where I used to watch the rain. Every memory felt like a ghost sitting beside me. And yet, somewhere between heartbreak and exhaustion, a strange calm found me. Maybe this was the universe forcing me to start over, because I never would have left that house on my own. Days turned into weeks. I rented a small studio downtown, nothing fancy, but it had light, warmth, and a window that looked over a small park. I started working part-time at a thrift store, folding donated clothes and chatting with customers. Funny thing about working there, people come in with their old lives in boxes. Some bring clothes of those who passed away, others bring wedding dresses they never wore. And somehow, helping them let go helped me let go too. One afternoon, a young woman came in. She must have been in her 20s, nervous and teary. She wanted to sell a few things, said she was moving out after a breakup. As I helped her unpack, she said, "Sometimes you have to lose everything to figure out who you are." I smiled and told her, "That's the truth, honey, and sometimes losing everything is the only way to start living again." I don't think she realized she gave me the very words I needed to hear myself. Meanwhile, I didn't hear from my son for months. Not a call, not even a message. At first, I thought maybe he was ashamed. Then I realized he probably wasn't. But life has a way of circling back to those who wrong others. One cold November morning, I got a letter in my mailbox. The return address read, Carter Construction Inc., the company I started 35 years ago. I froze. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a notice. Apparently, the company had gone under. Financial fraud. Multiple loans in my son's name. The same lawyer who helped him take my house was now representing his creditors. For a moment, I felt pity. Then, I remembered how he had watched me sign those papers, knowing full well what he was doing, and all I could think was, the house took my name off the deed. But karma doesn't need signatures. Weeks later, he called. It was the first time I'd heard his voice since everything happened. Mom, I messed up. I didn't say a word. I thought I was helping us. I thought I could make something bigger. But now they're saying I could lose everything. I could go to jail. I took a deep breath. You already did lose everything, son, I said softly. You just don't realize it yet. There was silence on the other end, heavy and long. He finally whispered, I didn't mean to hurt you. I almost laughed. That's the thing about meaning well. I told him, intentions don't heal damage. Actions do. He cried. And for a brief moment, I wanted to tell him it would be okay, that I still loved him, that he could come back home. But then, I remembered that home isn't mine anymore, and maybe it never really was. A few months later, I heard through a neighbor that the house had been foreclosed. The new owners had painted it white, torn out my rose bushes, and built a wooden deck where my garden used to be. I didn't feel sadness. I didn't feel anger either. I just felt peace. Because that house was never just a building. It was proof of what I could build from nothing. And now, I was building something again, only this time, it was myself. I started teaching part-time at a community center financial literacy classes for women my age who were starting over after divorce, widowhood, or family betrayal. I showed them how to manage savings, read contracts, and never sign anything they didn't understand. Every time I looked at those women, I saw a reflection of myself. One of them asked me once, how did you forgive your son? I paused, then said, I didn't forgive him to free him. I forgave him to free myself. And that's the truth, because carrying anger only keeps you chained to what hurt you. It's been 3 years now. I still live in the same apartment. Every Sunday, I sit by that same window with my coffee, watching families walk by in the park below. Sometimes, I see a young boy holding his mother's hand, laughing the way my son used to, and I whisper a small prayer not for my past but for his future. My son did eventually visit me. Once, he had lost nearly everything. His wife had left him. The business was gone. He sat across from me at the small kitchen table, hands trembling, eyes red. Mom, how did you do it? How did you survive all this? I looked at him quietly and said, I stopped surviving the day I started living. The trick isn't to keep what you have, it's to keep who you are. He didn't say much after that, but when he left, I saw something in his eyes, a glimmer of the boy I raised before greed took him away. Maybe that's enough for me. Maybe forgiveness isn't about reunion, it's about release. Sometimes, I think back to that day, the day I sold my house. People told me I was crazy, that I should have fought, sued, taken back what was mine. But what they didn't understand is that I did take it back, because my son took my house. Yes, but he didn't take my peace. He didn't take my integrity. And he sure as hell didn't take my strength. That house was made of bricks and beams. But I am made of lessons and scars. And I've learned that sometimes, life tears down everything you built, just to remind you that you were the foundation all along. So, if you're listening right now, maybe from some other corner of the world, maybe at a time when your heart feels empty, let me tell you something. You can lose your house, you can lose your savings, you can even lose your family, but don't you ever lose your self-respect, because once you let that go, no house in the world can shelter you. Asterisk. Thank you for staying with me through this. If you feel like sharing, tell me where you are, what time it is, and maybe what you're rebuilding in your own life right now. This is Florence Carter, signing off from a small apartment in Boise, Idaho, where I may have lost a house, but found a home within myself. Sometimes justice isn't about punishment, it's about peace. Sometimes the truest revenge is rebuilding your life so fully, the past can no longer recognize you.